I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. Thanks to quite a recent video from Bobby over at his excellent channel Dusty Old Movies, running down his 7 favourite episodes of Kolchak, I decided that it was probably about time I plugged a gap in my horror knowledge. I had sort of vaguely been aware of Kolchak for a long time. I knew that he was, as a character, a direct influence on Chris Carter in creating the X-Files, but I'm not really sure that Kolchak and the Night Stalker and the Night Strangler were as big culturally here in the UK as they were in America. Basically, Kolchak was a big deal. He was a big success, and it was high time I checked it out for myself. So recently, because they're both available on YouTube, I watched myself The Night Stalker and then The Night Strangler. Now, before going in, I knew that Carl Kolchak was a journalist, and I knew that he investigated the weird and wonderful, the sort of occult, the supernatural, you know, like the X-Files. And that's pretty much how it breaks down. The Night Stalker follows newspaper journalist Carl Kolchak as he is investigating a string of serial murders and comes to believe that the perpetrator is not a serial killer but a real-life vampire. He butts heads with his editor, Tony Vincenzo. He butts heads with the Las Vegas Police Department. He finds out information about the murders which they haven't released to the wider public for fear of affecting tourism in the area, so like a precursor of Mayor Vaughan in Jaws not wanting to close the beaches for the 4th of July. And Carl is a wonderful mixture of self-righteous sort of crusader for truth and the news, and the public has a right to know, whilst at the same time realising that he is on to a really tasty story that is going to help his career no end. He's really down at heel, and he's been kicked out of New York and really wants to return to New York. He's got a really tarnished reputation, so there's always something in it for him, but what's in it for him runs parallel to what I think he genuinely believes is the right thing to do. So we get a vampire in Las Vegas way before the Fright Night remake puts Colin Farrell's Jerry Dandridge in the sort of suburbs of Las Vegas. And what you have is a really familiar feeling sort of gumshoe detective story with supernatural elements. And I guess the main reason I felt so at home and so comfortable with it is because in many ways I'm sure that The Night Strangler set the template for an awful lot of what was to come. One can only imagine how vibrant and exciting it must have been to watch it when it aired back in 1972. But it's pulling on well-established roots as well. I understand that Darren McGavin, who plays Carl Kolchak, also used to play a Mickey Spillane character on TV. So the roots of Carl Kolchak as a sort of cynical, world-weary, anti-authoritarian seeker of truth are well established. But here there is a vibrancy and a pep to it that is not just because of the introduction of the supernatural. An awful lot of this I'm going to lay at the feet of Darren McGavin, who is an actor that I will be honest, I was not familiar with until I watched The Night Stalker and The Night Strangler, and I'm now an avowed fan. Darren McGavin brings Carl Kolchak to life in a way that I can't see anyone else in the role. And I know that there was a sort of reboot or a remake attempt in the early 2000s, and I'm not even really that interested in seeing it, because what I want to see is Darren McGavin as Carl Kolchak, and I'm really excited that I got 20 episodes of Kolchak the Night Stalker to spend more time with him. The energy he brings to the the character. The sense of character he brings to Karl Kolchak. I believe an awful lot of his outfit came from McGavin himself, believing that this is how the character should look. It wasn't written that way. He was supposed to be a bit schlubby with Hawaiian shirts and shorts. The chemistry McGavin has with the other players, especially his long-suffering editor Tony Vincenzo, is what keeps the plot driving forwards. Him butting heads with the police commissioner, basically just being a pain in everyone's ass and like a dog with a bone who just won't let it go. I will say, though, that the second act does seem to spin its wheels quite a lot. There's an awful lot of what seems to be repetition in it. The police will get called to an area. They will confront the villain, the criminal, and then there will be a big chase and a big fight, and he will be shot multiple times. He'll display superhuman strength and get away. Rinse and repeat. That happens quite a lot until we get to the third act, where I think the Night Stalker really pays off. Kolchak's been doing his digging and has identified where he believes the vampire's lair is, an old semi-abandoned house that he goes to half an hour before he tells his friend to alert the police so that he can get the scoop. He can get his pictures for the newspaper, get his story there before they come in and trample all over it and spoil the story. The segment where he enters and is wandering through the house, for something that was charming and familiar and enjoyable and quite a bit of a romp, suddenly started giving me the chills, I'll be honest. It is a clear forerunner to me of the Marston House in Toby Hooper's Salem's Lot, and anytime, and also Jerry Dandridge's house in Tom Holland's Fright Night. Anytime a character goes into an old, abandoned or gothic lair, seemingly empty, quiet as the grave, and starts poking around when there might be a vampire in there, just pushes all of my buttons. And this segment of the movie is absolutely superb. I loved it. We went straight on to watching The Night Strangler, which is also available on YouTube, and that was released in 1973, a year later. I mean, who wouldn't want a sequel? Who wouldn't want to spend more time with this character? And I was so glad for the opportunity to do so, and really buoyed by the surprise return of his editor, Vincenzo. I guess that sort of golden dynamic, that wonderful chemistry, you don't just want to throw away because Karl Kolchak has been booted out of Las Vegas and is now scratching around, walking the beat in Seattle. By hook or by crook, whatever you need to do to get the Vincenzo character in Seattle so that they can start butting heads again, I will forgive that. I will completely suspend my disbelief that coincidentally, he's just turned up in Seattle for a job and he's an editor again. Fine, get them together, get them shouting at one another, and let's get on with the case. This time, different women are being killed in a different city, but it all seems very familiar. In fact, the first 15 or 20 minutes so of The Night Strangler is almost an exact carbon copy of the structure of The Night Stalker. In fact, from beginning to end, there are an awful lot of similarities between the two. If there had been 15 or 20 years between them, we would be calling The Night Strangler a sort of legacy sequel stroke reboot, but they were released a year apart. However, a winning formula is a winning formula, and I think by now everyone was really comfortable in their roles, you know, from the top down. Dan Curtis, Richard Matheson, all the actors, and it just has so much vim and so much energy. They slightly dialed up the humour, which is really welcome in The Night Strangler. There's possibly a little bit more money because things just look a little bit better. So this is a case really of familiarity, not breeding contempt. In fact, personally, for me, and this might sound blasphemous for long-term Kolchak fans, I kind of prefer the Night Strangler. I think they got in their groove at that point and everything was firing on all cylinders apart from maybe one aspect. The antagonist in the Night Stalker, the vampire, is superior to the baddie in the Night Strangler, who is an alchemist, a 144-year-old alchemist who needs to harvest blood once every 21 years to make his potion to prolong his life and stop him rotting into dust and bones. So, as Carl digs into the history of these murders, he discovers that every 21 years, going back to the late 1800s, during an 18-day period, 5 women in the same area are always strangled to death and some of their blood is removed. My goodness, you betcha Kolchak is an inspiration to the X-Files. I mean, fair play to Chris Carter for flat out saying it, because he wouldn't have fooled anyone if he'd have tried to deny it. Everything in a way is a sort of slightly amped up, bigger and better version of the first movie. The villain's lair now, rather than being a sort of run-down, abandoned, quasi-gothic-y house, is the concreted over undercity of Seattle. A wonderful set, some matte paintings and models and stuff like that for the wide shots. Think something like Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and then into a glorious sort of like much more enclosed set of an old sort of gothic-y mansion house with think of a dinner table with candelabras and desiccated corpses around the table with lots and lots of cobwebs. Absolutely delicious for an old horror hound like me. The killer, as I say, lacks the pizzazz of the vampire from the Night Stalker, but everything else retains that energy and the flow. It's just so enjoyable to watch. And so now I am going to jump happily straight in, both feet, into Kolchak, the Night Stalker TV series. I can't believe I've got 20 more episodes to hang around with Carl Kolchak. And I really hope that somehow, some way, whatever trick of scripting you need to use, Tony Vincenzo is along for the ride as well.